Once again, we're glad to be together, have opportunity to worship and study. It's always a pleasure to me. Just enjoy every time we get together. It helps me, and I hope it does you. Probably most of you already know, but we've heard about Wes Brown having a heart attack, evidently at home, then another one when he got to the emergency room. And a couple of stents have been put in. He's at UAB, so keep Wes in our prayers. David has COVID. He was diagnosed with that. I believe he learned the results yesterday. And he's not feeling well at all. So we hope things go well with him too. Pray for him. And Adriana texted me a little bit earlier, and she's not well this afternoon, tonight. And so she said if she could feel a little better, she'd try to come in a little bit late. And then we heard about Charlie's having a surgery, shoulder replacement, March 9. Richard is pending, right? And then Lee, February 25. So we'll have three of us. I told Brother Gene the other day, and I told Lee, I said with MRIs that she and I've had recently, I said, I wonder if it'd be wise just to get a used MRI machine. Maybe we need a surgical outfit that we can put somewhere close by. But anyway, I'm just thankful for the medical care that we have. We have great medical care, and I'm just thankful that we have it. People complain about the cost. Well, you know, I think somebody who goes into me and replaces a hip or something like that ought to be paid a little bit more maybe than, you know, somebody who's picking berries out on a farm somewhere. I think that's that should be the case. Anyway, we're glad to be together. Let's go through briefly our readings that we have. We're in the book of Numbers. Of tonight, we go through the 13th, which was Sunday, was number 44 on the reading schedule. That's Numbers 5 and 6, and it goes through 13. We want to remember Numbers is about what? The numbering of the people, the organization of the people. And we have in 1 and 2 the numbering, 3 and 4 their organization, and 5 various laws. In chapter 6, the law of the Nazarite. There were, do we know how many Nazarites there are who were mentioned in the Bible? 3. Who are they, Robin? John the Baptist? Good. John the Baptist, Samuel, and Samson. And this is the law concerning them in the 6th chapter. The priestly blessings are mentioned at the end of the 6th chapter. In chapter 7, various sacrifices for leaders or princes. And then in chapter 8, the purification of who? Who's mentioned there in chapter 8? The dedication of the Levites. In chapter 9, the cloud is over the tabernacle, and various laws are given. And then in 10, we have a very significant thing that happens. In 10, verse 11, in the 2nd year, the 2nd month, on the 20th day, what happens? No? Yeah, you're thinking about something else. That's right. That's when they leave Sinai. Right, 2nd. Good. And I mentioned Sunday morning, if you'll recall, that if you go all the way back to, some of you might not have been here, but in Exodus, the 19th chapter, they come to Mount Sinai the 3rd month after they had left Rephidim. And so if you take your Bible, from there you have got a tremendous amount, you know, of paper in your Bible, of ink, divine writings that were given between then and this, and that took place in roughly, I think you mentioned Sandra, about a year, not just a part of a year. And so that shows that there's some significance in the law The law was our tutor to bring us to Christ. It was a system of statutes and ordinances that would reveal God's righteousness to the people. It would help them to become a nationalistic people that would eventually come to Christ. But anyway, all of that's given. So 10 verse 11 is the second. We've got the first part of Numbers, and then we have here they leave Sinai and they start really to go toward where? The land of Canaan. And it's not long, we see in 11, they leave and they go in verse 29, Moses says to Hobab, the son of Reuel, it'd be good if you went with us, and we will do you good. But one thing common in their journeys here is they don't go hardly anywhere, and what happens? They begin to do what? They murmur, complain. That's right. Chapter 11, they are murmuring, speaking evil in the ears of the Lord. They go to Taberah in chapter 3, verse 3. It's named that because of what? Because of the burning, yes. And then a little bit later, they come through, I won't go into all the details, but eventually in chapter 12, what happens? Miriam and Aaron do what? They complain against Moses because he had done what? Right, married an Ethiopian woman. What happens to Miriam? She has leprosy, right, and she has it for a while. Eventually, it's cleared up. And then in 13, eventually they come to verse 1. Afterward, the people journeyed from Hazareth and encamped in the wilderness of Paran. That's the end of 12. And then they come on to where? And what happens? That's right. And they send out, from here they send out the 12 spies. And so really 13 and 14 go together. They send out the spies. They come back after 40 days and they say what? We can't take the land. And so as a result of that 14, God says, because you disbelieved me, you're going to do what? You'll wander for a year for every day. And what he did was he allowed that present generation to do what? To die. All of them died except Joshua and Caleb. And that would have been all of them died who were of what age? 20 and above. Yes, 20 and above. You're exactly right, Sandra. I think it was right, like 38 and a half, something like that. They maybe 6 months or so that they cover from the time they leave Mount Sinai. Yeah, that's a good point. So we say the 40-year wandering wilderness, but it's more like 38. The whole time was 40. Yeah. Okay, real good. All right, I'm enjoying the readings. Hope you are too. Comment, question? All right. Well, let's move on, and where did I put the? That's okay. I think I know where it is. Yes, exactly. Yeah, and that's basically what happened. Yeah. Okay. I want to remember where we are in our study of Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, and Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. The people have returned 536 BC. Ezra recalls what had happened, though he wasn't there. And in Ezra, they rebuild what? The temple. Then we have later on the account of Esther. And then a little bit later on, we have Nehemiah coming. And Ezra comes later, and then Nehemiah comes. And here we have the two major parts of, number one, the reconstruction of the wall, and then the restoration of the people. And we finish chapter 10. Okay, so in 8, they read the law. Ezra reads the law, And the people's emotional state is what? What's that? Yes. Right. They were sad because of their sins, which was good, but it was the seventh month, and so that was the Feast of Tabernacles, and so that was a time of joy. So that, but then in chapter 8, we have and that was in 8. Then 9 is this lengthy prayer and a confession of sin, God's greatness, our sinfulness. And then in chapter 10, which we finished Sunday morning, we have the people have done what? They've made a covenant. They've covenanted to do what is right. Some specifics are mentioned as to what they would specifically keep. Leland and I were talking on the way over, and I thought she had made a pretty good point about a kind of a parallel between what we have in chapter 10, the names of these people who covenanted to do this, and the signers of the Declaration of Independence. When people put their name on the Declaration of Independence, they're basically signing their death warrant if we had lost the Revolutionary War. And there toward the end, they said, Gene, you remember the quote, we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And most of them lost their fortunes. Most of them did. And Lee, we're going to say something else about the idea that these names were, I don't remember exactly what you said. When you affix your name to a document like this, you seal it. There's some things that, later on. What did you mention? Yes.
And you're showing that you're united in purpose with these other people. And now, whether these people together, I don't know, but the Lord thought it was important enough for us to see that there were.
Later on down the line.
That if your family, that if you have a family member, what if your family member was, somebody that had done a great thing and it was acknowledged publicly or something, that would give you a sense of maybe inspiration to, it would inspire you to go ahead and keep up the good work, so to speak. Yeah. And just like Moses mentioned that Abraham, that God had said Abraham will command his children
After him.
and that, and it's sometimes referred to that, connects them back to Abraham.
Yeah.
His faithfulness.
Yes, yeah.
Like that, and so there's a sense of wanting to, you can inspire your family after you.
Yeah, people talk about a legacy, and that should have done it, whether it did or not, if there's an intention behind it. Can you hear me? Okay. It's good when I'm not saying anything. It's not cutting out at all. Okay. So there are a lot of things. I had a note in that I'll show you in just a minute about in chapter 11, when we have all these genealogies, or at least the families that are mentioned in specific, that, when I was younger and trying to get serious about Scripture, I'd read these, and, the names are kind of hard to pronounce, and a lot of them, and it's long, and you think, well, let's just skip to the next page and keep going. But there are some divine reasons, and we might not know all of them. We might not even know some of them, but there are some divine reasons, because we know Jesus said, man shall not live by bread alone, but what? By every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. So regardless of whether or not I see the reason, there's some reasons to go through. All right, so in chapter 10, we have this commitment, the covenant to keep the law. And then in chapter 11 through 12:26, and Sister Waldron on that, if you'll notice on page 100 and I guess it's 108, yes, toward the top of page 108 in the Waldron manual, the inhabitants of Jerusalem and other cities, chapter 11, verse 1 through chapter 12, verse 26. I'd like for us to read just a little bit of their material, and then we'll go in our Bible. Look at does everybody have your Waldron material? It's the first paragraph. Their city of Jerusalem could not prosper until its population was larger. Therefore, the leaders of the people settled in Jerusalem, and then, to be fair, lots were cast. One family out of every 10 was chosen to move into the city. Some volunteered to move, and they were commended by their brethren. It was more like a patriotic sacrifice they made. The names of the family heads who agreed to move into the city are listed in chapter 11. Then in chapter 12, the names of the priests and Levites who returned with Zerubbabel. Now, Zerubbabel, same time or earlier than Nehemiah? Earlier, that's right. So they returned. So he includes them, but they actually happened earlier. And those who had served from those days until the days of Nehemiah are given. It must have been interesting for later generations of Jews to be able to look back at the various lists found in the book of Nehemiah to see which portion of the walls their forefathers built, or which fathers added their names to those signing and sealing the covenant, or which families moved into the new city of Jerusalem, or which priests and Levites served during the period. Then in chapter 12, verse 26 verses, the gatekeepers, singers, priests, and all the other Levites were assigned to their particular task and were assigned to their particular order in which to work, according to the division of labor as prescribed in the days of David. So I wanted to read that. That kind of gets us through this lengthy reading here. All right. So if you'll notice up here, I quoted from Rawlinson, who is one of the editors for Pulpit Commentary, and this was in part of the introduction to this chapter. In Jerusalem at this time, the special need of an increase in the number of the inhabitants was probably the defense of the walls. These had been rebuilt on the ancient foundations. Their circuit, not much less than 4 miles. I think you and I saw 2.5 miles at some point, possibly the circumference of the wall. And to man them in case of attack, a large population was necessary. From a comparison of the numbers given in this chapter, that's chapter 11, and with those of 1 Chronicles 9, it may be gathered that the result of Nehemiah's arrangements was to give Jerusalem a population of about 20,000 souls. If you add everybody up together, it comes very close to about 20,000 people. Differences found in this list and those in 1 Chronicles 9 can likely be explained several ways. Those in 1 Chronicles 9 were people who came with Zerubbabel. Those numbered here, that is in Nehemiah 11, included people who came with Ezra and Nehemiah later. So you've got kind of a combination of these lists. Furthermore, those in the Chronicles may have been selected primarily for genealogical purposes, whereas here it was likely for national and political importance. Genealogical listings can be given for different reasons, and some generations can be skipped. Yeah, I think we're all more familiar with Matthew 1 and Luke 3. In Matthew 1, it starts with Abraham, the book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. So he goes all the way back to Abraham. Well, the reason is Abraham is the father of what? The Jewish nation. And Matthew's emphasis is that Jesus fulfills all of the expectations of the Jews. And so you have Abraham beget Isaac and so on. When you go to Luke 3, he starts at Jesus and goes backward. Instead of Abraham and going forward, he starts at Jesus and goes backward all the way to Adam, and who he mentions was the Son of God. Luke's particular emphasis identifies Jesus as all human. And so with Adam, tracing his lineage all the way to Adam, Adam being basically the father of the human race, it shows that Jesus is basically a brother to us all. And he was all human. So you've got those two listings that all of us are familiar with, that there's a different emphasis on each. And they stop in different places. And likely the same is true for here in Nehemiah. A third thing I wanted to mention is the purpose. You know, we don't want to get lost in the forest for the trees. The purpose of such listings could serve several purposes. Or I should say the listing. I used the word purpose twice, didn't I? I didn't see that. Including at least these three. First, such would show evidence of God's fulfillment of his promises relative to the Jews' return to Jerusalem and rebuilding of the temple that he had promised. You know, he's telling Jeremiah, he's telling even Isaiah, you know, people are going to be carried off, but they're going to return. There will be a remnant that returns. And so the promises were kept. The settlement of families specifically mentioned prove this. Second, the genealogy and maintenance of the priestly order, as well as the tribal land divisions, was necessary for their continuity as a physical nation. If they're going to continue as a nation, they had to know who's who and who has the specific obligations and where their lands were and all that to go back to their various territories. And then, of course, everything's pointing to Jesus. The genealogy of Jesus Christ proved his legitimacy to David's throne through Zerubbabel. And we have Zerubbabel mentioned a number of times. So there could be several reasons that these lists are given. All right, so here we are. Comment or question? I know I'll just keep talking. Anybody? Yes. You made an oath to God. Yes. You were going to keep this commandment. Yes. And you have it. That's a good point, Ed, that you had family members that promised you would do this, and basically you apostatized again. Yep.
When you look at it, where they realized that their forefathers had not done what God
Yes.
said they would do. So they're making a public commitment that we, from this point on,
We're going.
do what God
Yes. And unfortunately, about 10 years later, during the days of Malachi, they're going through the motions, is about the best you can say. They're offering animals, but what kind of animals were they offering? Blind, lame, maimed, all of that. Okay, so let's look at it here. In chapter 11, we have the first two verses. We show an effort to increase the population of Jerusalem. And then in 3 through 36, which is the better part of the chapter, really all the rest of the chapter, you have the listing of these residents by families: Judah, Benjamin, the priests, Levites, other groups, and then the towns. And I mentioned under the first part here that this remedy was necessary due to the problem mentioned earlier. If you look back real quickly at chapter 7, verse 4, 7 verse 4, the city was what? Large, but what? The people were few, and the houses were not built. So it's almost like the city of Jerusalem at this point we're reading about was like an administrative city. You have these religious people here, some governmental people here, but it's not well defended because there's not many people there. And so we need more people. So in chapter 11 now, in the first two verses, we have this effort to restock it. Kirsten, if you would read 11, 1 and 2 for us, please.
Now the leaders of the people lived in Jerusalem, and the rest of the people cast lots to bring 1 out of 10 into Jerusalem, the holy city, while 9 out of 10 were in the other towns. And the people burned all the men who fell in the opportunity.
Okay, so how did they determine who would be there? Cast lots, and 1 out of 10 would come. And then what was their feeling for those who voluntarily moved into Jerusalem? They were happy. Again, about the best way you could describe it is maybe a patriotic sacrifice for, take one for the team, so to speak. And so I'll move in. It's not what I really want to do, but they would do that anyway. And so they offered themselves to dwell in Jerusalem. All right, now, here's a listing. And again, you've got people in Judah, and we have Manasseh we have Manasseh and Ephraim mentioned in other places in 1 Chronicles 9, but they're not mentioned here. Primarily priests or people from the tribe of Levi, some of Judah and Benjamin, primarily. All right, let's note, we're not going to read all of these. I hope you did at home, but read with me, and we're going to spot read some of this. In verses 3 through 9 that I have listed on the chart, those of Judah and Benjamin. In verse 3, these are the chiefs of the province dwell in Jerusalem, but in the cities of Judah dwelt everyone in his position in their cities. Israel, the priests, the Levites, the Nethinim, or temple servants, and the children of Solomon's servants. All right, and now we've got those in Judah, and the names are mentioned. Athaiah, the son of Uzziah, all the way down to verse 6. All the sons of Perez that dwelt in Jerusalem were how many? 468. So those were from Judah. Then in verse 7, the sons of whom? Benjamin. Some of them are mentioned. And then in verse 8, how many were there? 928. All right. And then Joel, this is verse 9, Joel the son of Zichri was their overseer, and Judah was next to him over the city. All right, so we have Judah and Benjamin mentioned in verses 3 through 9. Who's mentioned in 10 through 14? The priest, Jediah and others. Zadok is mentioned in verse 11. How many were they in verse 12? 822. And then if you go down to verse 13, chiefs of fathers' houses, there were 200 and how many? 42. Down in verse 14, the mighty men of valor, how many were there? 128. All right, so you have priest in verses 10 through 14. Then as we mentioned up here, 15 through 19, Levites. Mentioned, I notice in verse 16, Shabbathai and Jozabad, the chiefs of the Levites, who had the oversight of the outward business of the house of God, evidently maintenance and repairs. They are mentioned. How many Levites altogether does he count in verse 18? 284, all right? And then in verses, in verse 20, moreover, the porters, that would be the doorkeepers, were 100 and how many? That's 19, verse 19. 172, good. And then in 20 through 24, we have other groups mentioned. The residue or the rest of Israel mentioned. And they dwelt in Ophel, not all that far from Bethlehem. In verse 22, the overseer also of the Levites at Jerusalem was Uzziah, the son of Bani, and so on. And so that goes down to 24. Then in 25 through 36, the towns occupied in Judah and Benjamin, villages with their fields, are mentioned there in verse 25. Down in verse 30, the latter part of 30, they count from Beersheba to the valley of Hinnom. The valley of Hinnom was that southern valley, southern south of Jerusalem, right, where a lot of trash was burned. So you've got that southern area of Judah. In verse 36, the Levites, certain divisions in Judah were joined to Benjamin. I didn't take too long, but I didn't think it necessary, but except for us to just note that these are people who were there with Nehemiah, and some of them are of the same people who affixed their name to this covenant in chapter 10, and now they're dwelling in the city. All right, in chapter 12, let's take another few minutes. In chapter 12, let me advance our slides here. In chapter 12, we have the listings of the priests and the Levites. There are two major sections. The listing of them who came out with Zerubbabel, and then he fast forwards all the way down really to probably around 333 BC with the high priest. Then the second major idea is the dedication of the wall and the ceremonies that went with it. So that's what I mentioned in the note. There are two major sections to chapter 12. 1 through 26 continue the previous listings of chapter 11, giving priests and Levites who returned with Zerubbabel. And so we're talking, 90 years roughly from before this. Then descendants of the high priest Joshua, then the heads of the families of priests, and records of families of priests and Levites, ending with temple responsibilities. The second half of the chapter, Nehemiah returns to his leadership activities with the dedication of the walls, thanksgiving, singing, appointment of overseers to ensure that the Mosaic law is kept relative to the upkeep of the Levites and the priests. All right, so that's just kind of an introduction to it. So here we go. And on our chart with the priestly and Levitical lineage, priests and Levites who came with Zerubbabel in the first 9 verses, the high priest. In verses 10 and 11, we might pause on just for a minute because that takes us down. Let's look at this. You have a real key in the first verse. These are now it's like he shifts gears. Okay, we've been talking about everybody who's with me now. Nehemiah's time. BC. But now he says he's combining that with these are the priests, the Levites that went up with Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel. Zerubbabel is significant in all of this because he's in the lineage of whom? Jesus Christ. Yes, he's in the lineage of Jesus Christ, Matthew and Luke. Or Matthew's account rather. And so these are mentioned in these first 9 verses, Amariah, Moloch, and others, Iddu. If you'll skip down to verse 7, these were the chiefs of the priests, or leaders among the priests and of their brethren in the days of who? Jeshua. Remember, Zerubbabel was the governor, and Jeshua, back in Ezra 1, was the high priest. Right. Okay. All right. Now, in verses 8 and verses 8 and 9, moreover, the Levites, Jeshua, Benui, Kadmiel, Sherebiah, Judah, Mattaniah, who was over the thanksgiving, or did your translation say the choirs, the singers? Okay, led the thanksgiving songs, he and his brethren. Also, Bakbukiah and Uno, their brethren, were over against them according to their offices. That's the end of verse 9. Now, in verses 10 and 11, what happens is he mentions, I think there are about 6 of these high priests. Jeshua begat Jehoiakim, and Jehoiakim begat Eliashib. Eliashib begat Joiada, and Joiada begat Jonathan, and Jonathan begat Jaddua. Now, I've got a note up here about these. According to, first of all, the high priests who were there mentioned in 10 and 11 were from the time of the return from captivity past Nehemiah, all the way down to about 333. And according to Josephus, Jaddua, who was the last one mentioned, had an interview with Alexander the Great shortly after the Battle of Issus in 333. And so these 2 verses cover the time when they came back about 536 BC to about 333 BC. That's about 203 years. So you've got about 6 You know, that's roughly 35 years a person. You've got, for their high priestly functions, you've got that span of time passing that he really compresses in those 2 verses. That makes sense to everybody? So what he's doing, he's put together in chapter 11, he's put together everybody who's here with me right now. And then in chapter 12, he goes all the way back to those who were coming out with Zerubbabel, and then he goes fast forward into the time even past himself. All right. Priest families at the time of Jehoiakim are mentioned in 12 through 21. We're just going to kind of spot read these. Look at 12, verse 12. And in the days of Jehoiakim were priests, heads of fathers, houses. So you've got people who are represented. Not everybody, but representatives of the heads of the families. Down in verses 22 through 26, the Levites during the time of Jehoiakim are mentioned. As for the Levites, in the days of Elisha, Joiada, Johanan, Jaddua, they were reported the heads of the fathers' houses, also the priests. Now we have a little bookmark, a little footnote here. During the reign of Darius the Persian, Darius the Persian. I've got a chart here that you have. You remember the chart I gave you here, the Persian, the chronology of the Persian rulers? You remember giving that out? Okay. Now what we've got, don't have a pointer with me. If you'll look to Artaxerxes the first, you got Cyrus, Cambyses, Darius the first, Xerxes, and then Artaxerxes or Longomatus. All right, that's 464 to 423. That's during the time of Nehemiah. That's during the time we're talking about now, 445, 444 BC. Following him was Darius II or Nothus. Then following him was Artaxerxes II. Then Artaxerxes III. Then Arsus. And then Darius III, who also was known as Cotomanus, from 335 to 331. And that is likely the Darius that he has reference to, if you look here in verse 22. These high priests continued on down, and in the reign of Darius the Persian, the last phrase of verse 22. So best we know, likely Malachi or someone after added this part to because he didn't live long enough to do all that. But that's still a part of the record. We go on back. Let me go backwards here to where we were. The Levites during the time of Jehoiakim, verse 23, the sons of Levi, heads of fathers' houses, were written in the book of Chronicles, even to the days of Johanan, the son of Elisha. And then go down to 26 with me. These were in the days of Joachim, the son of Jeshua, the son of Jozadak, in the days of Nehemiah the governor, and of Ezra the priest, the scribe. So we have all of these put together again in chapter 11, Nehemiah's time. In chapter 12, he goes all the way back and then goes all the way forward with specifics from the Levites and priests. You look like you wanted to say something. Anybody? Brother Gene, did you want? Okay. Again, I didn't think it was necessary for us to just read every name, but highlight it and give kind of where he was going with all that. Okay, so that's where we are, best we can tell. Now, we got about 3 minutes. In 27 through 47, we have the dedication of the walls. And I found a quote, or found a statement that I wanted to quote for you. I've got a series of commentaries that were John Burke's, that his widow gave me. It's by the College Press Publishing House. College Press is kind of an arm of the Christian church, and they're not bad, but I have found the work on Nehemiah pretty good. And this fellow by the name of Ratcliffe said it's a people, in the dedication of the walls, he made the point, it is people who are being dedicated more than things, than the walls, and the act of dedication was more spiritual and psychological than physical. The great the greatest value of the wall also was psychological, as it furnished success and encouragement to a dispirited people. Here, they've built the wall, but they know about all their past. And so here we're dedicating it to God. We're dedicating everything, the people, the priest, all of it's being dedicated. But it's almost like we are, it's kind of like, being given a second chance at something. Something goes wrong and then you start over afresh. There's a kind of a renewed spirit, a kind of the idea, I'm going to do it this time. I'm not going to let it, get down. I'm going to really strive to do it. And that seems to be what a part of this is all about. Let's do just a little reading, and then we'll probably pick up with the ceremonies on Sunday morning. 27 through 30. Let's just read that. Sandra, if you would, 27 through 30 of chapter 12, where he gathers the Levites for the dedication. Okay, that's good. So we've got everybody assembled, their purification process going on to ready themselves for this dedication process that's mentioned really in 31 through the end. And so it's a big deal, and they're making a big deal out of it. Nehemiah's making a big deal, and Ezra. We'll see Nehemiah leads one party as they're, can you picture this? They're up on the top of the wall, and Nehemiah leads one group. I think his group goes south. And all this, and Ezra leads another one. I couldn't help but think you got Ezra the scribe, kind of religious, Nehemiah the governor, political. You got exactly what God wants, kind of a theocracy, all combined with Ezra and Nehemiah, and they're going around the wall singing and praising God for all the good things. So it's a big deal, and it's praising God for the fact He's fulfilled His promises. We're back. We're going to rededicate ourselves, and so that's kind of where we are. We'll finish, Lord willing, finish 12 Sunday morning, and then 13 we'll go ahead and get into. We may finish it, but 13 there's some problems, and we have to go back. And time passes, and I will show this. If you'll notice in verse 6 of chapter 13. And all this time I was not at Jerusalem, for in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I went to the king, and after certain days asked I leave of the king, and I came back to Jerusalem. So during the meantime, Nehemiah goes back to Babylon, stays a while, and then he comes back. And this is the year 432 BC. And you can put that down, you can take that to the bank because of the year, the 32nd year of Artaxerxes. And you put that in, 464 minus 32, and you got 432 BC. So some time passes, and then the people get lax again, and so in 13 we have to go back and correct some of that. Comment, question, anybody? Sir? Probably the defense, more responsibilities, more work. Yeah, more work. Yeah, I think that's right. All right, guys. Thank you for your help. More work usually scares